Thanks for tuning in. I'm your host, Andy Zopp, and this is Chicago Newsroom 2.0. In today's roundtable segment, we'll take a closer look at the latest news about the ongoing migrant crisis, the ongoing CTA turmoil, and the city's recently released summer safety plan with Austin Weekly News reporter Francia Garcia Hernandez and the host of Munson Tonight, Ashley Munson. But first, I'll sit one-on-one with University of Chicago Crime Lab's Director of Programs, Kim Smith, to discuss a new study that sheds light on both the frequency and proximity of violent crimes in Chicago. We'll get started on the other side of this short break. Stay with us.
On the series premiere of The Compassionate Competitor, I sit in conversation with NFL pro turned father, cowboy, and owner of the R. Hughes Ranch, Robert Hughes. Join the conversation Thursday, June 20th at 7 p.m. on CAN TV Cable Channel 19, or stream live on cantv.org, or on the new CAN TV Plus app. Elevated conversation and storytelling. Experience the power of community television.
A new analysis from the University of Chicago Crime Lab found that more than a third of yearly shootings in Chicago happened in the summer. Those shootings are not only concentrated in the summer months, but overwhelmingly impact a small geographic region of the city. To tell us more about the study and how it might better inform where violence interrupters, law enforcement, and the business community should put resources, I'm joined by the University of Chicago Crime Lab Director of Programs, Kim Smith. Welcome to the newsroom, Kim.
Thank you for having me.
First, just for my viewers who aren't familiar with the Crime Lab, which I am very familiar, would you also tell us a little bit about the work you do there and what you study?
Of course. So the University of Chicago Crime Lab, we are a nonpartisan, nonprofit research center based at the Harris School of Public Policy, and we work with government and nonprofit organizations in Chicago to identify, test, and scale programs and policies that can reduce gun violence while simultaneously reducing the harms of the criminal justice system.
Right. And the Crime Labs does work that then is used to inform actual policies like data analysis and how the police should staff and use their resources and things like. So it has real impact on on violence prevention.
Yes, our goal is not to publish academic journals that other academics are going to read. Of course, we want to do rigorous research, but we also want our research to be relevant and have impact in the lives of everyday Chicagoans, and not just folks in Chicago. We really do think that Chicago gets a bad rap. Obviously, we have challenges with gun violence and with education, but we're also on the frontier of innovation in Chicago. We really invest a lot in new strategies. We have a really robust civic community and philanthropic community that funds research and funds innovation. So the things that we're learning in Chicago, our hope is that it will actually improve outcomes in a lot of cities around the country.
Right, and we're going to get to the study in a minute, but you said something that I just want to highlight for my viewers, and that was innovation in the city and the work that you do. You know, you work very closely with the Chicago Police Department and the mayor's office, isn't that correct? And they're pretty open to hearing what you have to say and trying to use what you have to say or your studies find to change their practices. I think that's an important point to make for people.
Yes, so one of the programs that we've evaluated with the Chicago Police Department and the Department of Public Health is a diversion program. It's actually the largest drug diversion program in the country, and we've found that it can reduce rearrest. It increases the connection to services of individuals who might be experiencing substance use disorder, and it saves officers time. So instead of spending time processing low-level arrests where people are not getting the supports they need, we're actually connecting individuals to services and doing a warm handoff to the social service sector. And the fact that the Department of Public Health, the police department, nonprofit organizations, Threshold in this case, were able and willing to partner on such a really ambitious program, I think speaks to the nature of innovation happening in Chicago.
Right, really important point. I think, sometimes people think all, the police do is arrest people and aren't really thoughtful. And about how a program like the diversion program really also helps police, because they're, to your point, they're not spending their time on people who are not violent or dangerous, but who are addicted. But we came here to talk about your study. So tell us a little bit about your study and what you were looking at and what you found.
So, of course, Chicago, so well known for the summer. It's personally my favorite season, but it's also a time where the city does experience increases in gun violence, specifically shootings and homicides. And we wanted to provide a resource to nonprofit organizations, the business community, philanthropy, the mayor's office, as they're starting to think about summer safety strategies. So we looked at 5 years of data and broke the city out into grid cells. And those grid cells, we looked at all of the shootings and homicides that took place in those grid cells. And what we found was that a tiny share of those cells account for a really large number of gun violence incidents every summer. And we produced this to really direct resources. So as we're thinking about summer job recruitment, where do we focus those activities? As we're thinking about place-based activations, block parties, parks events, thinking about prioritizing those grid cells where we unfortunately see a high number of shootings.
So let's talk a little bit about the grid cells. How are they defined? By block, by zip code, by how big are they, and how did you define them?
So we broke the city out into 1,000-foot by 1,000-foot grid cells, and there are about 7,000 of those in the city. And then for each grid cell, we looked at how many shootings took place within those boundaries. And you see a really large range. Some cells have 0, and some have up to 50 incidents over the last 5 years. And to think that, 1,000-foot by 1,000-foot geography, it's not a big geography, but to have 10, 20, 40 shootings happen in that same place year after year, not just the loss of life and personal injury, but the exposure to trauma and what is happening on those blocks. How are we supporting young people, families who live on those blocks, who've lost loved ones, who saw the incident take place? We really just wanted to visualize that so that we could all kind of collectively think about solutions.
And where are those areas that are? Are there? I assume those cells are clustered in most instances. Where are those?
So we see a lot of those cells on the south and west sides. It's really unfortunate that the same neighborhoods that have really suffered from a lack of investment and structural challenges are also the places where we see persistent gun violence happening year over year. So for example, in East and West Garfield Park, Austin, North Lawndale, Inglewood, those are some of the community areas where we see a lot of incidents kind of concentrated. But I think what's also really exciting is there are incredible nonprofit organizations, a lot of investment going into those neighborhoods. So we wanted to kind of highlight, not just at the community level, but at the block level where additional investments could be really powerful.
Right. I think that's an important thing you said. And again, I want to circle back and make sure it doesn't kind of get lost in some of the bigger points that you're making. And that is, this report was aimed at not just the police department, not just the mayor's office, but philanthropy and not-for-profit. So let's talk a little bit about how you think or you hope the police department will use some of the information that you said.
So we're hoping that in addition to bringing the police department to the table, they can work with organizations like the Parks Department or Chicago Public Schools. If there are, for example, school buildings in some of those grid cells, could they be activated over the summer months to provide safe places for young people to continue their education or to partake in a summer job? Same thing with Chicago Public Libraries. We have some beautiful public library buildings around the city. If we have a library that's located in an area proximate to one of those high violence grid cells, how do we make sure the library, again, is activated during those summer months? Another thing that we saw was that a lot of incidents are taking place after kind of business hours, between 8 p.m. and 3 a.m. So how do we, again, think creatively as a city, not just the police department, but the public health department, nonprofit organizations, the civic committee, create space for opportunities during those late night hours when we unfortunately see a lot of incidents taking place.
Right. And I would think one other thing, you think about the focus, like you said, it's a 1,000 foot area to have 40, 30, 40, 50 shootings. It's a small area. Yeah. There must be a high impact of trauma.
Of course.
Right? So it's another way, I would think part of what you hope people will get out of it is for the city and the health department, think about how do we focus resources for trauma? Because of course trauma also then leads to more violence, right?
Of course. And one of the things that we and others have studied over the years is the impact of exposure to trauma, not just on future violence involvement, but even on your ability to succeed in school. We see that in Chicago, there was a study done a number of years ago where young people who live on a block where a homicide has taken place, they test as if they've lost 2 years of school because of that exposure to a homicide. So again, thinking about a block where 10, 20 shootings have taken place over 5 years, how are we wrapping those families, those students around with supports? What are the trauma supports that we're providing at the school level, at the household level, at the individual level?
Right. Wow. So really incredibly important work. And shockingly, we are out of time talking about this work. But thank you for doing the study and sharing this information that'll help us better support the people who are trying to help keep our city safe.
Thanks for having me.
We will be right back with this week's Roundtable.
Hi everyone, I'm Ashley Munson, inviting you to join me and my Chief of Staff, Justin James, and the band with no name to the series premiere of Munson Tonight. We'll do our level best to make politics make sense. Join the conversation Thursday at 7:30 p.m. on CAN TV Cable Channel 19, or stream live on cantv.org, or on the new CAN TV Plus app. Hyperlocal news and public affairs. Experience the power of community television.
Today, we're going to discuss 3 tough issues that are front and center for city leaders as we enter the summer: the ongoing migrant crisis, the poorly performing and troubled CTA, and the mayor's summer safety plan. Nearly 2 full years since the first buses of asylum seekers arrived in Chicago, the city continues to struggle with mastering the critical balance that is providing the new arrivals with sorely needed support, while ensuring the city's limited resources aren't further diverted from historically underserved communities and longtime residents. And on the CTA, despite continuing calls for his resignation or termination, a defiant Dorval Carter recently sat before the City Council defending himself and insisting that his personal background and long career at the CTA made him the right choice to lead the agency through its current challenges. And a public safety expert claims the mayor's public safety plan is a, quote, economic development plan disguised as a public safety plan. To help us take a closer look at this trifecta of pressing issues, I'm joined by Newsroom regular Austin Weekly News reporter Francia Garcia Hernandez, and making her first appearance, political pundit and the host of CAN TV's new original program, Munson Tonight, Ashley Munson. Let's start with the migrant crisis. I'm going to ask you both kind of where you think where we are right now in the migrant crisis and how we sit as we enter the summer. Francia, I'm going to start with you because you and I have talked about this topic several times here.
Well, I think a lot has happened since we last talked about it, but a lot has not changed. So we have seen some shelters close, some city shelters close, and numbers reduced, but there is still not a plan in place if more migrants were to arrive tomorrow. Obviously, we know this is not controlled by the city. This is determined by federal policy. This is determined by the number of people who cross the border, and that might change over time. But if there were a sudden influx, there is no clear plan of where people would be housed or would be sleeping. And I think a news report just came out maybe last week saying many of the people who were supposed to leave after their 60-day moratorium or a period ended come back, and they just keep coming back to the shelter system. So it's inefficient that the city is saying you have to leave if they're going to end up coming back, and it's creating stability for these migrant families or individuals.
Ashley, what's your take on it from a political perspective?
Yeah, thanks for that question. I think it's going to take time to see what happens, right? I think one thing we have to acknowledge is that Mayor Johnson did not have this issue by itself, right? When we talk about where it started, we started to see an influx of migrants when Mayor Lightfoot was there. Right. And so, of course, there were more when Mayor Johnson got here. But we also have to acknowledge that this takes time to handle. And though we're working to figure things out and people are trying to put plans in place, you have people that are making complaints, rightfully so, about folks that have been here that have felt like they've been disinvested in. So you have both sides of the coin, right? It takes time to see how we can work it out, but also you have residents who have been disadvantaged for years. So I think it's going to take time, but I think we have to have real solutions, like you hinted at, to handle the problem.
I want to circle back to a couple of things that are happening that might help a little bit. One is President Biden's order on the border that has, in essence, closed the border, or at least limited pretty dramatically the number of people that can come through. And the other is, as you said, there's a slower influx of migrants. So do you think that will at least give the city and perhaps the state some time to come up with a better plan?
I would hope so personally. I think the city had initially, or maybe early this year, had touted about creating partnerships with churches and local organizations and creating more of a multi-part system that could help the city house migrants if they were going to arrive. And I don't think much has been shared after. What happened? Is that in place? What would be the sites where migrants would be housed? And would the state be willing to give more money to the cities? Because there are many migrants that have gone outside on their own, outside of Chicago, but Chicago bears the burden of the most migrants staying in the city. So I think there also needs to be a conversation about funding that doesn't seem to be happening right now. Nevertheless, it could be happening behind closed doors.
Can I add to that?
Sure,
the state legislature just passed a bill. Matter of fact, the biggest bill that Illinois has passed in a while, and that includes funding for migrants. I know we're going to hop to the question about how communities are feeling, but money is being addressed, and where that money is being allocated and how we use it is a different question. But I think there are conversations about how we use that money and if we use it well.
So on this kind of balance between the migrant community and communities that exist here, a pastor here, Ken Phelps, who's the senior pastor at Concord Missionary Baptist Church, which is in Woodlawn, wrote in an editorial that was in the New Yorker. He said that he wants to change the narrative because he thinks the narrative has been a discord narrative, that it's been about placing communities against each other. I don't know, what do you think about that? And you think there's some things we can do about it and that the media can do to help change the narrative?
For sure. I think if we take a step back of how we got in this situation, right, we have governors from Republican states sending migrants here, right? So they're trying to prove a point, but also showing us how they experience some of the migrant influx. So you already have people trying to make a point that is influencing this conversation between Black and brown people. And I do think it is a narrative that needs to be adjusted. And I do think that in the midst of that, Black and brown people can find collaboration. Like, it is frustrating. You've been here for however many years you've been here, and then you see resources going to other communities. And it makes you think, well, we've been asking for resources for years, and now we come up with billions of dollars for folks, our other brothers and sisters. So maybe we should work together with our brown sisters and brothers and folks to see how we can pull these resources and demand both the city and the state and federally. You hinted at it, that it's a federal conversation. So I do think it's a narrative that needs to be shifted, but I think government and political officials need to work together to educate about this issue and bring people together, because that's where it starts. It starts with education and conversation.
We could talk about this for the whole rest of the show, as Francia knows, but I want to move on. So let's talk about the CTA. The CTA's had a lot of issues, lately, safety, cleanliness, timeliness, and I've seen articles about people who are not, who are buying cars, right? So that they don't have to take the public transportation. I mean, what are you hearing about from people about the CTA and how they feel about how it's working?
Yeah, a lot of the things I've heard have been about safety, right? I used to work downtown taking the green line straight to my job, but it's been about safety. And I think residents are concerned with safety across the board. So if we talk about the accountability of CTA, I think he was right in stating that, because he's Black, he's being held accountable. That's fine. Everyone should be held accountable, but it's not solely because you're Black. It's because you haven't showed up to council meetings. Right. They requested you to show up and give the facts. You didn't do that. So of course you're going to be held accountable. And across the board, there needs to be accountability, to your point about cleanliness in the park districts. And CPS, we got to make sure we're taking care of the school. So there needs to be accountability across the board, but CTA is a real problem, especially when you're seeing Pace do better. They're doing better than they were pre-COVID. Same thing with Metra. So what is CTA doing would be my question.
Francia, what are you hearing from the people you talk to?
I think majority of people feel that it's not reliable, that they cannot use it to get safely to where they want to go or need to go, whether it's work, whether it's taking their kids to school, whether it's trying to do something recreational, whatever their needs might be. Unless you have 2 or 3 hours to get yourself there and know that maybe you'll be waiting for 30 minutes for a bus, or you'll be at the train station and you'll be waiting and waiting and waiting, you can't take it. And I think that's what the majority of people say, like, I cannot wait for an hour for the bus to come and then get to work when they have already so many other pressing needs. And I think that's the most important part of the accountability conversation. At the end of the day, the CTA is a public service. It's serving millions of people and millions of people who rely on it. And some of the most vulnerable there, people in wheelchairs. There are plenty of train stations where the elevator is out of service or has not worked in a very long time. So people who really need the service can't rely on it, and that really calls for accountability and change. And that's where many residents are frustrated and are calling for something different.
Well, before we run out of time, we got to talk about the safety plan. And there was a former federal prosecutor who made the comment that it's an economic development plan disguised as a public safety plan. I'm not sure what he meant, and I'm not sure why that's a bad thing, actually, right? I'm like, well, yeah, some economic development might help with public safety, but I don't know. What do you think, Ashley? You think we need to be focusing more? I'm not sure what you mean when you should be focusing more on public safety. Giving people, opportunities is a important step in public safety, in my view, but I don't know. What do you think?
No, I totally agree. I think when you help the economic engine, you deal with some of the other things that come from that, the outputs, right? So public safety, jobs, transportation, and things like that. So I agree. I don't know if it's a bad thing, but I do think one of the things that we have to take into consideration as Chicagoans is some of these things take time to implement. You can't expect a plan to be in place today and work tomorrow, which is the problem with some of the things like the Safety Act, which is a whole different conversation. Right. But looking at those things to say, are we really making real change? And I think the plan is good. It's working with community groups like Good Kids, Mad City. It has a lot of community input where they went across the city to get input from residents and stakeholders alike. But I think it's going to take time. And while I am rooting for the plan, I really want to see some real changes and real, at least steps to say we're headed in the right direction this summer.
Francia, what are you hearing? Are people cooperating? Has the police made some progress on their relationships with community? Because to me, that's an important part of advancing public safety. What are you hearing in Austin?
Well, certainly the recent incident where it was a police officer who shot Dexter Reed, and there was a loss of life, and that's an incident that's still under investigation. But so far, the evidence points that this was a pretextual stop, which a lot of reports have come out in recent months that also show pretextual stops have not decreased, and the Superintendent Snelling is saying it will decrease, and there has been, I think, 80,000 decrease to date this year, which the data has not accounted for. But these incidents fall short from showing that there's real change, because there might be police officers who are dedicated out in the community building relationships, but then as an institution, police comes out with incidents that show a different direction. So it's always kind of like one step forward, 2 steps back, and from what I'm hearing, and there is a lot of outcry from many residents who have been, affected by it, who have lost a family member to police or who have been racially targeted in the past. So it's really hard to build those relationships. It doesn't help when incidents like this happen, get so public, and there are so many reports that show the data is there, and police has not been historically the best with Black and brown communities. I do hope that there is some indication for change, and Superintendent Snelling keeps saying that is what will happen, but we don't see concrete actions. We see the talk, but we don't see this is how we are going to change this approach, which is what community members see in practice. They don't see the superintendent speaking to them. They see a police officer stopping them. So.
Right. So I think that's going to be important to really make a difference. I would say the only other thing about the plan that I really liked is that, it is not just the police. I think that piece that we were talking about, relationships with the community, is going to be critically important, and hopefully they'll continue to work on that. And I think communities where it's better, they're going to be safer. But I also think the fact that it's not just the police, it's community groups. It is the business community putting investments in it, because we're not going to do it alone, because unfortunately there are still way too many guns out there. And so unless you can divert attention from some of and give these young people in particular something better to do with their time and their energy, I think we're going to continue to have real challenges. So I love the fact that the plan really tries to consider all of that, and that we're continuing to hire kids, right? And give them something to do with their summer, because that will help keep them off the street. And
can I just say something about that? I think it's also opening up opportunities. Many people may say, oh, it's just a summer job, but I've spoken to so many young kids who say that summer job led me to see something that I had not seen before in my neighborhood, in my school, in my family, and that widens their lens and changes their lives. So that's something positive that we may not measure immediately. We may not see the results of tomorrow, but it's definitely making a difference.
It makes a huge difference. Wow, great point. Shockingly, ladies, we are out of time. I can't believe it, but as always, you great insight, Francia and Ashley. We're going to have to come back and become a regular, because your thoughts have really been welcome, and I appreciate it. And thank you for joining us tonight. Thank you to my friends for being here with us. We'll be right back with a special edition of Final Thoughts. Stay with us.
On the series premiere of The Compassionate Competitor, I sit in conversation with NFL pro turned father, cowboy, and owner of the R. Hughes Ranch, Robert Hughes. Join the conversation Thursday, June 20th at 7 p.m. on CAN TV Cable Channel 19, or stream live on cantv.org, or on the new CAN TV Plus app. Elevated conversation and storytelling. Experience the power of community television.
I asked Ashley to stick around because this month's Final Thoughts are about her new show, Munson Tonight, a new CAN TV original program designed to make politics make sense for everyday Chicagoans like you and me. Featuring a studio audience and a live band. Whoa! Ashley holds court, delivering her unique, often hilarious take on politics and politicians. Take a look.
Hi, guys. In local news, Mayor Brandon Johnson has reached his first year of being in office. That's something to clap for. Now, hopefully he doesn't run away from supporters in his second year. I mean, run for us. I'm sorry, Mayor. If you want to run here to the show, we'll be definitely glad to have a conversation with you. Please welcome former Mayor Lori with the Y. Yeah. Mayor Lori Lightfoot. If you were president, what would you do about inflation?
Okay. I tell them to stop. I sit all the big boys down and I say, hey, stop.
Those are the things you need to know. Make the laws and spend the money, and we help the governor do that.
So you spend our money?
We use fancy words like
semantics.
Appropriate.
Okay, semantics.
Yeah.
Congratulations, Ashley, and best of luck on what looks like a fantastic show. Munson Tonight premieres Thursday, June 20th at 7:30 p.m. right here on CAN TV 19. That's our time for this month. Until next time, stay well and well informed.